joined by Maddie Depler from the Independent Women's Forum and National Taxpayers Union, and Alex Brill from AEI. Welcome to you both. Maddie, let me start with you on this. Do you think the Supreme Court made the right call here?
You know, I don't, and I'm worried for taxpayers moving forward. Basically, as you mentioned before, what the Supreme Court did was erode 30 years of precedent saying that a business must have a physical presence in a state in order for that state to tax that business. So right now, we're looking at a future now of basically borderless bureaucrats. It really doesn't matter where you are located in the country. A bureaucrat in a different part of the country now has the authority to tax your transaction. This is very worrisome for interstate commerce moving forward, not just because of the administration burden that this faces, but because it's the ultimate taxation without representation.
Maddie, were you surprised? I believe Neil Gorsuch and some of the conservatives were part of the Kennedy majority opinion here.
Yeah, it was an interesting breakdown amongst the Supreme Court. And really what I had expected was a much more narrow decision here, where essentially the Supreme Court potentially could have said that the way South Dakota approached this issue was not the right way, but remanded it back and ordered that the states or that Congress takes a look at it. Instead, the Supreme Court said, listen, this basis that we've been using for the past better part of 3 decades isn't the right one, and we need to reassess.
Alex, you think they made the right call here. Why is that?
I do. I think that there's a modernization that came down from the Supreme Court today, a recognition that the internet is a large part of our economy, and that it's important as a matter of fairness and as a matter of good economic principle to pursue what I would call a level playing field. We shouldn't have a subsidy on any type of seller over another seller. And so while this is, sometimes being characterized today as good news for the brick and mortar guys, what's really important is that no one's getting a preference. Now, this does not mean that any state can go out and put in place any system they want to go and grind down hard on some mom and pop online retailer. They have to do this in a balanced way, and that's one of the things that we see from the court. They have to pursue this level playing field that allows the small businesses to fairly participate without advantaging them.
Maddie, you mentioned that this may encompass other things, not just the sales tax issue, but what is it about this ruling that you think makes businesses more susceptible to state-by-state or jurisdiction-by-jurisdiction regulation?
Well, I mean, here's the difficulty that I have with Alex's assessment of all of this, which is this notion that somehow businesses aren't competing in a level playing field. Listen, all businesses, all generations have had to deal with this advancement in modernization and technology. The question is whether or not we have public policy that befits the current circumstances. Nothing has been more democratizing for small business than the internet. So the notion that we are now moving forward in a way that levels the playing field for something that small businesses everywhere have benefited from simply isn't true. You saw earlier, Amazon itself already collects sales tax, but they don't collect sales tax for their independent vendors who are on that website. So the small businesses, the people who are using these platforms, are the ones who are going to struggle to keep up with these changes in the tax code.
Alex, what about that?
That's actually not how the law in South Dakota works. The law in South Dakota says that small businesses are exempt. Right, and so they've set very clear rules.
I'm not
about
necessarily, Alex. Not 200 transactions.
Fewer than 200 transactions.
If you're a small jewelry
or less than
vendor on Etsy or something, that could be your
and they
business.
could change that, right, Alex? What if people come out and say, okay, it's that was South Dakota's threshold, but ours is lower?
And it may go back up to the courts. And this is not the last we're going to hear of this issue. It could go back up to the Supreme Court in another case. And I do definitely think that this is likely headed to Congress as well, because there are rules that need to be addressed, such as what is overly burdensome, who is a small seller. Congress has thought about taking this up in the past. I think they're more likely to take this up in the future. But I think that it's a little bit hyperbolic to suggest that all the states are going to try to reach out in some unfair way. And as you mentioned at the top of the show, some of this additional tax revenue that's going to come in is going to be used to lower taxes in certain states.
Right, that's why they're going to reach out for the revenue, right? I mean, Maddie, if I were them, I'd do the same thing. This isn't going to last for that long, that the first movers will have a competitive advantage before. I don't know if Congress can get its act together and get this done before the midterms, or if that would be likely after, but to just make one kind of blanket, here are the rules for everybody.
Yeah, the difficulty is we've got 12,000 different taxing jurisdictions in this country. So how do you align all of those different authorities? I don't know the answer to that question, and you're right. Congress has to intervene, and the fact that Congress now has to save us from this morass the Supreme Court has created, I think, should be worrisome for everyone.
Well, not to
one
mention
of the things we heard today.
Go ahead, Alex.
Well, one of the things we heard today from the decision that was handed down, where all 9 justices agreed, even those that dissented, is that this physical presence rule is silly. It doesn't make sense in the modern era. The notion that some small online seller has a warehouse in one state and therefore is subject to tax, and another online seller who's larger doesn't have that warehouse. That's not a good way to define the line.
Well, let me ask you, going forward, if they start to say, you know what, then any company with a virtual presence in another state also has to be subject to all of their regulations, that would worry you guys, I imagine, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's exactly what we're setting ourselves up for.
All right. Guys, thank you both. Alex Brill, Maddie Depler, reacting to today's Supreme Court decision.